My father-in-law looked the doctor straight in the eye and said, "She's a drug addict. This was bound to happen." The emergency room went silent. Every nurse, every technician, every person in scrubs turned to stare at me. My 6-month-old twins were somewhere behind those double doors, fighting for their lives, and Roland had just painted a target on my back with 5 words that would change everything. "That's not true!" My voice cracked as I spun toward him, my whole body shaking. "How could you say that?" Roland crossed his arms, his postal worker's pension watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Doctor, check her medical records. Postpartum depression, anxiety medication. She's been spiraling for months." The doctor's expression shifted from concerned to suspicious in an instant. A nurse beside him pulled out a clipboard, already making notes. I could see it happening in real time, the transformation from grieving mother to suspected child poisoner. "Mr. Roland, please," my mother-in-law Joyce pleaded, grabbing his sleeve. "This isn't helping anyone." "Someone needs to tell the truth," Roland shot back, his voice carrying across the waiting room. "Those babies didn't just stop breathing on their own." My husband Colton stood frozen between his father and me, his warehouse uniform still dusty from the emergency shift he'd left. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what you're too blind to do, son, protecting those children from her negligence." The doctor raised his hand for silence. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions. Did you administer any medications to your infants today?" "No, I wasn't even there. They were with my in-laws all afternoon." "She dropped them off acting strange," Roland interrupted. "Agitated, talking fast, couldn't wait to leave." That was a complete lie, and Joyce knew it. I saw her face crumble, caught between loyalty to her husband and the truth she'd witnessed. She'd been the one who'd hugged me at the door, who'd assured me everything would be fine, who'd practically pushed me out to enjoy my first break in months. A security guard had appeared, positioning himself near the entrance like I might try to run. 2 more nurses joined the doctor, their faces masks of professional judgment. In minutes, I'd gone from a terrified mother to a criminal suspect. "We're running full toxicology panels on both infants," the doctor announced, his tone cold and clinical. "Child Protective Services has been notified and will be here shortly. You can't be serious." Colton finally found his voice. "My wife would never hurt our children." Roland turned on his son. "How would you know? You're never home. Working extra shifts while she's alone with 3 kids, overwhelmed and exhausted. You didn't see what I saw." "What did you see?" I demanded, stepping toward him despite the security guard's movement in my direction. "A woman at her breaking point," Roland said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Crying when she thinks no one's looking, snapping at Penny over nothing, barely able to keep her eyes open during Sunday dinner." Every word was twisted truth. Yes, I was tired. What mother of infant twins wasn't? Yes, I'd cried in the bathroom during last week's family dinner when both babies wouldn't stop screaming, and Roland had made another comment about how some women just aren't cut out for multiple children. The social worker arrived then, a woman in her 40s with a leather portfolio and an expression that said she'd already made up her mind. She went straight to Roland, who immediately launched into his performance again. "I've been worried for weeks," he told her, his voice dripping with false concern. "My wife and I discussed calling someone, but we didn't want to break up the family." That's when I noticed Penny. My 8-year-old daughter sat in the corner with a coloring book Joyce had found somewhere, but she wasn't coloring. She was watching everything with those big brown eyes that missed nothing, the same eyes that had watched me struggle and fight and love her sisters every single day since they'd been born. "Mommy?" she said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. "It's okay, baby," I said, though nothing was okay. She stood up, her pink sundress wrinkled from hours of waiting, and walked past the security guard, past the suspicious nurses, past her father, who seemed frozen in place. She came straight to me and took my hand. Then she turned to face the room full of adults who thought they knew everything. "Grandpa," she said, her voice small but clear, "why did you put medicine in the baby's bottles? You said it would make them sleep forever." The emergency room erupted into chaos, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the sound of truth finally breaking through. Life wasn't perfect, but we were making it work. That's what I told myself every morning when I woke up to the twins crying in stereo at 5 a.m. Ruby always started first, her voice high and demanding, then Jade would join in with her deeper, more insistent wail. By the time I reached their nursery, Penny would be standing in the doorway rubbing her eyes and asking if she could help feed them. "You're the best big sister in the world," I'd tell her, and she'd beam like I'd handed her a trophy. Our house in suburban Cleveland wasn't much to look at from the outside. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that needed updating 20 years ago. But Colton and I had painted every wall ourselves, built the twins' cribs together, and turned that drafty little ranch into something that felt like home. The backyard had a swing set we'd found at a garage sale, and Penny had claimed the big oak tree as her reading spot. Colton worked at the warehouse district downtown, managing inventory for a medical supply company. The pay was decent, but with 3 kids, decent meant stretched thin. He'd been picking up extra shifts since the twins were born, leaving before sunrise and coming home after they were already in bed. I watched him age 5 years in the last 6 months, the lines around his eyes deepening every time he looked at our bank balance. "We're gonna be okay," he'd whisper in the dark, both of us too tired for anything but holding each other. "My parents help out. Your dental office is holding your position. We just need to get through this first year." His parents. Roland and Joyce lived in the house where Colton grew up, a 2-story brick colonial with perfect roses in the front yard and a basement that still smelled like the model trains Roland used to build. Every Sunday after church, we'd pile into our minivan and drive those 20 minutes for dinner. It was tradition, non-negotiable, written in stone since before Penny was born. Joyce was everything a grandmother should be. She'd knitted blankets for all 3 girls, had their baby pictures covering her refrigerator, and always had fresh cookies waiting. She'd been a church secretary for 15 years, knew everyone in town, and had prayed for us to have another baby after years of miscarriages following Penny's birth. When we announced the twins, she'd actually cried with joy. Roland was different. He'd retired from the Postal Service 2 years ago after 35 years of delivering mail through Cleveland winters. Retirement hadn't suited him. The man who used to whistle while sorting mail now spent his days watching news channels and finding fault with everything around him. The government, the neighbors, the way people raise their kids these days. "Babies need structure," he'd announced when the twins were 2 weeks old. "You're too soft with them, Brooke. Let them cry it out." "They're newborns, Roland," I'd responded, trying to keep my voice light. "They need to know someone's there." "That's your problem. You coddle them." These comments had become more frequent. How I held them wrong, how I fed them too often, how their crying meant I was doing something wrong. Joyce would try to intervene, changing the subject or sending Roland to check something in the garage, but the criticism always found its way back. 3 weeks ago, he'd watched me trying to grocery shop with all 3 kids. The twins were screaming in their car seats. Penny was asking for cereal, and I was calculating whether we could afford both formula and diapers this week. Roland appeared at the end of the aisle like a judgment in human form. "This is what happens when people have more children than they can handle," he'd said, loud enough for other shoppers to hear. I'd left my half-full cart in the aisle and driven home in tears. But then there were good moments, too. Mornings when both twins would smile at the same time, evenings when Penny would read them stories in silly voices, Sundays when Joyce would take over feeding duty and I could actually eat my pot roast while it was still warm. These moments kept me going, kept me believing we were building something beautiful despite the chaos. My parents would have helped. They would have been here every day, my mother cooking freezer meals, my father fixing the leaky bathroom faucet. But they'd been gone for 3 years now, killed by a drunk driver on their way home from their 40th anniversary dinner. Some days I still reached for my phone to call my mom, to ask her if the twins' crying was normal, if Penny's questions about death were too heavy for an 8-year-old, if feeling like I was drowning was just part of motherhood or something darker. That Saturday morning, the last normal morning, Colton had kissed me goodbye at 6 a.m. "Extra shift means extra money," he'd said. "Mom and Dad offered to take all 3 kids this afternoon. Please, honey, take a break. Get your hair done. Remember who you were before the babies." I dropped the kids off at noon, carrying both car seats while Penny ran ahead with the diaper bag bouncing against her hip. The June sun was already brutal, making the walk from the driveway to their front door feel like a marathon. Joyce met us at the entrance, her face lighting up at the sight of the twins. "There are my angels!" She reached for Ruby's carrier first, then paused. "Brooke, honey, you look exhausted." "I'm fine," I said, the automatic response of every overwhelmed mother. Roland's voice carried from the living room. "Those babies crying again? I can hear them from here." They weren't even crying. Ruby was sucking on her fist, and Jade was staring at the ceiling fan, both perfectly content. Joyce and I exchanged a look, the kind women share when they're navigating around difficult men. "Come on in," Joyce said, taking Ruby's carrier. "I've got everything set up in the guest room." Their house always smelled like lemon pledge and coffee, even at noon. Roland sat in his brown leather recliner, the one nobody else was allowed to use, newspaper spread across his lap. He looked up just long enough to grunt a greeting. "Grandpa said he has special bottles for the babies," Penny announced, bouncing on her toes. That caught my attention. "Special bottles?" Roland finally lowered his newspaper. "Joyce bought some new anti-colic bottles at the pharmacy. They're supposed to reduce gas, help them sleep better." "I didn't buy any bottles," Joyce said, looking confused. "You must have forgotten," Roland said sharply. "They're in the kitchen next to the formula." Joyce frowned but didn't argue. That had become her pattern lately, choosing silence over confrontation. I should have paid more attention to that, should have recognized the sign of a woman who'd learned that fighting back made things worse. "I packed enough formula for 3 feedings," I said, setting down the diaper bag. "The pediatrician wants them eating every 3 hours." "Pediatricians don't know everything," Roland muttered, returning to his paper. Penny had already settled on the floor with her, coloring books, creating one of her elaborate fairy tale scenes. She'd been doing that a lot lately, escaping into worlds where grandpas were kind wizards and babies never cried. "Go," Joyce urged me, squeezing my shoulder. "We've raised a baby before, remember? Get your hair done, have lunch with a friend, be young for an afternoon." I hesitated at the door. Something felt wrong, like leaving in the middle of a conversation you couldn't quite hear. But Joyce was already settling the twins in their bouncy seats, and Penny was humming to herself, and Roland had disappeared behind his newspaper wall. The salon was a 20-minute drive, tucked into a strip mall between a Chinese restaurant and a tax office. I'd made the appointment 2 weeks ago, back when Colton first suggested I needed a break. The hairdresser, a woman named Deb who'd been cutting my hair since high school, took one look at me and poured me a cup of coffee. "Rough night with the twins?" "Rough 6 months," I admitted. She worked her magic while I sat there, and for the first time in months, I felt almost human. The woman in the mirror looked like she might have a life beyond bottles and diapers and 3 a.m. feedings. I even smiled at my reflection. After the salon, I met my friend Tanya at a coffee shop downtown. She didn't have kids yet, still lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with exposed brick and plants that actually stayed alive. We talked about her job at the marketing firm, about the guy she'd been dating, about anything except babies and exhaustion, and the way Roland's criticism had been wearing me down like water on stone. At 3:30, my phone exploded. 6 missed calls from Joyce, 2 from Colton's work number, and a text that just said, "Emergency call now." Joyce answered on the first ring, her voice shattered glass. "Brooke, get to Mercy Hospital right now. The twins stopped breathing. We called 911. They're working on them, but nobody will tell us anything. Just get here." The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights I didn't stop for, and prayers to my dead mother. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Every worst-case scenario played through my mind on repeat. SUDS could take 2 babies at once. Carbon monoxide poisoning. 100 terrible possibilities. I abandoned my car in the emergency room parking lot, not caring if it got towed. The automatic doors seemed to open in slow motion. Joyce stood near the reception desk, mascara streaking her cheeks. Roland leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Where are my babies?" The words tore out of my throat. "They're back there," Joyce sobbed, pointing to the restricted double doors. "They won't let us through. They just keep saying they're working on them." That's when Roland decided to light the match that would burn everything down. 2 hours had passed since Roland's accusation turned the emergency room into my personal trial. The plastic waiting room chair had molded to my body, creating a perfect imprint of desperation. Colton sat beside me, his hand on my knee but his eyes distant, processing his father's betrayal in real time. Every few minutes, he'd squeeze my knee like he was checking if I was still there, still real, still the woman he married, and not the monster his father was painting me to be. The social worker, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, had set up camp in the corner with her laptop and legal pad. She'd interviewed Roland 3 times already, taking careful notes as he embellished his story with each telling. Now he was adding details about finding me crying in the bathroom at Easter dinner, about the time I'd snapped at Penny for spilling juice on the carpet, about how I'd mentioned once that I missed my life before kids. "Every mother says that," Joyce had protested weakly. "It doesn't mean anything sinister." "Every mother doesn't have their babies rushed to the ER unconscious," Roland shot back. The police had arrived an hour ago. 2 officers who looked younger than me, taking statements and photographs and treating the waiting room like a crime scene. They'd searched my purse, finding nothing but expired coupons, pacifiers, and a bottle of Tylenol. Roland had seemed disappointed when they didn't discover a pharmacy's worth of illegal drugs. The initial blood work shows benzodiazepines in both infants' systems, the doctor had announced 30 minutes ago, and I'd watched my world tilt off its axis. "I don't even know what those are," I'd said, but Roland had already jumped in. "Anxiety medications, sedatives, the kind an overwhelmed mother might use to quiet crying babies." "I haven't taken anxiety medication in 5 months," I said, for what felt like the 100th time. "Check my medical records, call my doctor. I took them for 2 weeks after the twins were born, and they made me too drowsy to function." Penny had been so quiet through all of this, I'd almost forgotten she was there. Joyce had tried to take her to the cafeteria, but she'd refused to leave my side. She sat in the chair next to mine, working through a maze book someone had found in the gift shop, her tongue poking out in concentration, the way it did when she was thinking hard about something. The social worker approached us again, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you about your support system. Your parents are deceased, correct?" 3 years ago, I confirmed, the familiar ache spreading through my chest. "And you have no siblings?" "No." "So your primary support comes from your husband's family?" I could see where this was going. The isolated mother, dependent on in-laws who were now throwing her under the bus. I have friends, I have former co-workers from the dental office. But for childcare, for daily help? "Joyce and Roland," I admitted, the names tasting bitter now. Patricia made another note. I wanted to rip the pad from her, hands to read what narrative she was constructing about my life. Penny shifted beside me, closing her maze book with deliberate care. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Penny's voice was small but steady. The social worker softened, crouching to Penny's level. "Yes, sweetheart? Can I tell you something important?" "Of course." Penny looked at me, then at her father, then at Roland, who had stopped mid-sentence in his latest monologue to a nurse. She stood up, smoothing her pink sundress with both hands, a gesture so mature it broke my heart. "My mommy is a good mommy," she began. "She sings to the babies even when she's really tired. She makes my lunch special every day with notes that say, 'I love you.' She never forgets to check for monsters under my bed, even though we both know they're not real." "That's very sweet," Patricia said, but Penny wasn't finished. "I need to tell you what really happened today." Her voice grew stronger. "I saw something that Grandpa told me was a secret, but I don't think secrets should hurt people." Roland's face drained of color. "The child is confused. It's been a traumatic day." "I'm not confused," Penny said, turning to face him directly. "I'm 8 3/4, and I know what I saw." Joyce stood up slowly, her hand covering her mouth. "Penny, what did you see?" "I saw Grandpa in the kitchen with a little brown bottle. He put drops in Ruby and Jade's bottles, the special ones he said he bought. He counted the drops out loud, 5 in each bottle." The waiting room went completely silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to stop humming. "He said it was medicine to help them sleep," Penny continued, her words falling like stones into still water. "He said it would make them sleep for a very long time so Mommy could rest." Patricia Hendricks was already on her phone, calling for security. The police officers moved toward Roland, hands on their radios, and I finally understood why my father-in-law had been so quick to destroy me. He'd been building his alibi all along. The waiting room erupted into controlled chaos. Patricia Hendricks barked orders into her phone, while one police officer moved to block the exit and the other approached Roland with his hand resting on his belt. Roland's carefully constructed composure cracked like ice under pressure. "She's lying." Roland's voice pitched higher than I'd ever heard it. "The child doesn't understand what she saw. I was preparing their bottles with formula, nothing more." "Then you won't mind showing us this brown bottle," the younger officer said, pulling on latex gloves. "I don't have any bottle. The child is confused, traumatized. Her mother probably coached her to say this." Joyce was digging through her purse with frantic movements, then suddenly stopped. Her hand emerged holding a small brown prescription bottle with the label torn off. "This was in your jacket pocket this morning, Roland. I moved it when I was looking for the car keys." "You don't know what you're talking about," Roland snarled, lunging for the bottle, but the officer intercepted him. "Sir, I need you to step back and keep your hands visible." The doctor who'd been treating the twins burst through the double doors, his scrubs damp with sweat. "I need to know exactly what was given to those infants. Every second counts." The officer held up the brown bottle. "We just recovered this." The doctor snatched it, examining what remained of the label, then sniffing the contents. His face went pale. "This is lorazepam, a powerful benzodiazepine. An adult dose could kill an infant." He turned to Roland. "How much did you give them?" "I want a lawyer," Roland said. "Your granddaughters are dying." The doctor's professionalism shattered. "How many drops?" Penny stepped forward again. 5 drops in each bottle. I counted with him because he said it was important to get it exactly right. The doctor ran back through the double doors without another word. Joyce collapsed into a chair, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Colton stood frozen, staring at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. "Dad, what did you do?" Colton's voice was barely a whisper. Roland straightened his shoulders, and for a moment I saw the postal worker who'd delivered mail through blizzards, who'd never missed a day of work, who'd built his entire identity on being reliable, responsible, right? "I was helping," he said, his delusion complete. "She couldn't handle them. You all saw it, the crying, the exhaustion. She was going to hurt them eventually, or hurt herself. I was preventing a tragedy." "By causing one!" Joyce screamed, launching herself at him. The officers had to pull her back. "Those are our grandbabies. How could you?" "Your friend Bert," Joyce continued, the pieces falling into place. "You've been talking to him about his wife's leftover medications. She died of an overdose, Roland. And you thought her pills were safe for infants?" "Bert said small doses would just help them sleep. His daughter used them for her colicky baby." "Bert's daughter lost custody of her children." Joyce's revelation hung in the air like poison. "That's why she never visits. CPS took them after she was caught drugging them." Patricia Hendricks was documenting everything, her fingers flying across her phone screen. The officers had Roland in handcuffs now, reading him his rights while he continued his delusional rambling about being a concerned grandfather, about preventing future tragedy, about knowing what was best. "I've been planning this for weeks," he announced, like it was something to be proud of. "Researching online, finding the right dosage. I wasn't going to hurt them permanently, just give everyone a scare. Show my son what kind of mother he'd married. Make him see the truth." "The truth?" I found my voice finally. "The truth is, you tried to murder my babies because you decided I wasn't good enough for your son." "You're not!" Roland exploded. "You're weak, overwhelmed, broken. My son deserved better. Those children deserved better." "They deserved a grandfather who didn't try to kill them," Colton said quietly, and something in Roland's face finally cracked. Reality seeped in through the cracks, and for just a moment I saw him realize what he'd done. At 7:42 p.m., after the longest 4 hours of my life, a different doctor emerged. This one had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and when she smiled, I knew before she spoke. "Your daughters are stable. We were able to flush the medication from their systems with activated charcoal and supportive care. They're going to be okay." I collapsed against Colton, both of us sobbing while Penny wrapped her arms around us. Through my tears, I watched the police lead Roland away. He looked smaller somehow, shuffling between the officers, his retirement watch catching the light one last time. Joyce stood alone by the window, her 35-year marriage destroyed in an afternoon, her whole life revealed as a lie she'd been living without knowing it. The twins came home 3 days later, their tiny bodies hooked to portable monitors that beeped every time their heart rates changed. Ruby had bounced back faster, her fighter spirit evident even at 6 months old. Jade needed an extra day of oxygen, her smaller body having absorbed more of the poison Roland had measured out with such calculated precision. The house felt different now. Colton had taken indefinite leave from work, unable to process loading boxes while his father sat in county jail awaiting trial. He spent hours holding the twins, like he was trying to memorize their breathing, their weight, their existence. Sometimes I'd find him in their nursery at 3 a.m., not because they were crying, but because he needed to see them breathe. "I should have known," he said one night, both twins asleep on his chest. "All those comments he made about you, the way he criticized everything, I just thought he was being a grumpy old man." "He was your father. You loved him." "I enabled him," Colton corrected. "Every time I stayed quiet when he insulted you, every time I told you not to take it personally, I gave him permission to escalate." The investigation revealed the depth of Roland's planning. His computer history showed 6 weeks of research into infant sedatives, forum posts asking about helping overwhelmed mothers, and searches for how to prove maternal neglect. He'd created a narrative where he was the hero saving his grandchildren from an unfit mother, and he'd believed it so completely that he'd nearly killed them to prove it. Joyce filed for divorce the day after his arrest. She moved in with her sister in Michigan, but not before coming to see us one last time. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 days, her face hollow with grief and betrayal. "I found journals," she told me, sitting at my kitchen table while the twins napped. "Going back 2 years, ever since he retired. Pages and pages about how the world was going wrong, how women didn't know their place anymore, how modern mothers were failing their children. Your name started appearing after the twins were born." She pulled out a notebook, Roland's neat postman's handwriting filling every line. "He wrote that you were the perfect example of everything wrong with modern motherhood. Too soft, too tired, too emotional. He said saving his son from you would be his greatest retirement achievement." "Did you suspect anything?" I had to ask. Joyce's tears came fresh. "I knew he'd become more difficult, more critical. But I told myself it was just retirement adjustment. I made excuses. I chose comfort over confrontation, and my granddaughters nearly died because of it." The trial moved quickly. Roland pleaded guilty to attempted murder, his lawyer arguing for diminished capacity due to mental health issues. The judge, a grandmother herself, showed no mercy. 15 years in state prison, no possibility of early release for 5 years. Roland had looked at me during sentencing, and for a moment I saw confusion in his eyes, like he still couldn't understand how trying to save his son had led him here. Penny started therapy the week after the incident. The weight of carrying that secret, even for just a few hours, had affected her deeply. Dr. Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in family trauma, helped her understand that none of it was her fault. She saved her sisters' lives, Dr. Martinez told us after their 3rd session, but she's also processing that her grandfather, someone she loved and trusted, tried to hurt her siblings. That's a heavy burden for an 8-year-old. "I knew something was wrong," Penny told me one evening, curled up beside me on the couch. The way Grandpa smiled when he counted the drops. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile he had when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. 6 months later, at the twins' first birthday party, we were different people, stronger in some ways, broken in others. The party was small, just us and Tanya and a few friends from the mommy group I'd finally joined. No extended family, no grandparents beaming with pride. Colton had started therapy too, working through the guilt of choosing his father's comfort over his wife's pain for so many years. "I was raised to respect him," he said during one family session, "to never question him. That training nearly cost me everything." The twins thrived despite their traumatic beginning. Ruby remained our fierce one, demanding attention and laughing at everything. Jade was quieter, more observant, seeming to study the world before deciding to engage with it. Both perfectly healthy, no lasting effects from their grandfather's poison. Penny had become protective of them in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. She'd appointed herself their guardian, watching anyone who held them with suspicious eyes. We were working on that in therapy, helping her understand that vigilance didn't have to mean constant fear. Sometimes evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with warning signs and dramatic music. Sometimes it comes with pot roast dinners and offers to babysit, with concerned comments and helpful suggestions. It comes disguised as family, as tradition, as the way things have always been. But sometimes courage comes in small packages too. Sometimes it's an 8-year-old girl who loves her sisters more than she fears her grandfather, who chooses truth over secrets, who speaks up when the adults are too blinded by history to see the present danger. That's what saved us. Not the doctors, though they played their part. Not the police or social workers or justice system, though they all mattered. What saved us was a little girl with a maze book and the courage to solve the real puzzle in front of her, to point at the monster hiding in plain sight and say, "I see you." Roland had spent weeks planning our destruction, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing. Children see everything. They absorb the unspoken tensions, notice the subtle cruelties, catalog the moments adults think they're too young to understand. And sometimes, when it matters most, they tell the truth that everyone else is too polite, or too scared, or too conditioned to speak. The monitors are gone now. The twins sleep through the night in their own room, no longer tethered to machines that count their heartbeats. But I still check on them, still stand in their doorway and watch their chests rise and fall. Not because I'm afraid anymore, but because I'm grateful. Grateful they survived. Grateful Penny was brave. Grateful we learned that family isn't about blood or obligation or tradition. Family is about protection, real protection. It's about seeing danger and naming it, even when it wears familiar faces. It's about choosing truth over comfort, safety over silence, love over loyalty to those who would harm us. If you're watching this, remember that. Remember that your instincts matter, that criticism disguised as concern is still criticism, that anyone who tries to tear you down while claiming to build you up is not on your side, and that sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the most important message. Thank you for listening to our story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about the dynamics in your own family, please share it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family members who cross the line between helping and harming, and subscribe to this channel for more stories about survival, truth, and the unexpected heroes who save us. Because every family has secrets, but not every family has a Penny, brave enough to speak them aloud when silence could mean death.